The sun had barely crested the horizon at the interstellar trade port on Earth, casting long shadows across the bustling terminals. David, a seasoned diplomat with the Earth Interplanetary Relations Bureau, adjusted his ID badge as he walked towards the docking bay where the latest alien envoy was due to arrive. As he approached, he could see the crowd that had gathered. Among the onlookers were traders eager to catch a glimpse of the new arrivals and perhaps get an early start on negotiations. David scanned the area, noting the diverse array of species and technologies represented in the port. It was a melting pot of intergalactic cultures, each visit bringing its own surprises and challenges. A gentle hum filled the air as the alien ship descended. The crowd's murmur grew to a buzz of excitement. David stepped forward, ready to perform his duties. The ship's doors hissed open, and a line of alien delegates emerged, their forms varying from the familiar to the bizarre. Among them was Lyria, her slender form wrapped in a flowing garment that shimmered with the colors of her home planet. Her eyes, large and luminous, scanned the assembly curiously. David noted her interest. Her gaze lingered on the human faces, as if trying to read their expressions. "Welcome to Earth," David announced, stepping towards the delegates with a practiced smile. "I'm David Mallory, your liaison during your stay. We've prepared a series of briefings and tours to ensure your visit is productive and comfortable." Lyria stepped forward, her voice melodic yet carrying an authoritative undertone. "Thank you, David Mallory. We are eager to understand more about your people and your planet." As they walked towards the administrative building, David pointed out various landmarks and facilities around the port. Lyria listened intently, her head tilting slightly whenever she encountered something unfamiliar. "In our culture," David continued, feeling the need to fill the silence with more than just descriptions, "we place great value on the exchange of knowledge. We believe it strengthens ties and fosters peace." "A philosophy we share," Lyria responded. "My people are communicators. We thrive on understanding emotions and thoughts, which allows us to connect deeply with others." David was intrigued. "That sounds like a valuable skill in diplomacy." "It is," Lyria said, smiling. "Perhaps during my stay, we can share methods and learn from each other." "I'd like that," David admitted. The idea of learning about alien empathic techniques was fascinating. He could see potential beyond mere diplomatic applications, perhaps even in fostering better intercultural relations on Earth itself. As they reached the main building, David gestured towards the conference room. "We've prepared a welcome meeting here. You'll meet some of our leaders, and we can start discussing our agendas." Lyria nodded, her eyes reflecting a mix of anticipation and calm. "Lead the way, David." The room was filled with representatives from various Earth governments and commercial interests, all eager to make a good first impression. David introduced Lyria, who greeted each person with a grace that seemed to put everyone at ease. After the formalities, David and Lyria found themselves alone as the crowd dispersed to prepare for the upcoming sessions. "You handle their curiosity well," David remarked. "It is not curiosity that challenges us, but how we respond to it," Lyria replied. "I sense great potential for understanding between our people." David smiled, sensing the beginning of a significant journey, not just for himself and Lyria, but for all of humanity. As they began their work together, the possibilities seemed limitless. Chapter 2. The Connection. The next morning found David and Lyria strolling through a serene park near the trade port, a stark contrast to the bustling energy of their first meeting. The park was a favorite local retreat, designed to mimic Earth's various ecosystems, a peaceful backdrop for their informal discussion. David pointed towards a small artificial lake, its surface reflecting the clear blue sky. "This park is a symbol of Earth's natural beauty, recreated even in urban settings like this one," he explained. Lyria's gaze swept over the area, absorbing the scene. "It's beautiful," she acknowledged. On my planet, we integrate nature into everything. It's not just aesthetics. It's about balance and harmony. I think we have much to learn from each other, David said, leading the way to a bench. As they sat, he turned to her with a curious expression. Yesterday, you mentioned your people's ability to understand emotions. How does that work exactly? Lyria paused, considering how best to explain. It's like a dialogue without words. We sense emotions as if they were spoken language. It helps us connect deeply, but it also requires openness and trust. David nodded, intrigued. Trust is the foundation of any strong relationship. He mused aloud. Perhaps you could teach me some of your communication techniques. I would be happy to, Lyria replied with a smile. But it's not something that can be learned in a day. It requires practice and, most importantly, a willingness to be vulnerable. I'm willing, David stated earnestly. The prospect of such a unique form of connection was too compelling to pass up. They spent the morning discussing their respective cultures. David shared stories of Earth's diverse societies, the challenges and triumphs of human history, and the evolution of interstellar relations. Lyria listened intently, occasionally asking insightful questions that prompted David to think deeply about his own culture. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Lyria shifted the conversation. You've shared so much about humanity. What about you, David? What drives you in this job? David laughed softly, rubbing the back of his neck. I suppose it's the idea of making a difference, of bridging gaps between beings. Every successful negotiation feels like a step toward a more peaceful universe. That's a noble goal, Lyria observed. In my culture, those who seek to bridge are honored. They are known as the connectors. That sounds like a title I'd aspire to, David said, his tone light but his intention serious. As they continued their walk, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Favorite foods, music, hobbies. Lyria was particularly fascinated by human art and requested to visit a museum. Let's plan it for tomorrow, David proposed. There's an art museum not far from here that features works from around the globe. Lyria agreed eagerly. I look forward to it. Art speaks in a universal language, much like emotions. They parted ways later that afternoon, both enriched by the other's perspectives and looking forward to their museum visit. As David walked back to his office, he couldn't help but feel that the foundation of something significant was being laid. His thoughts lingered not just on the professional implications, but on the personal connection that was unexpectedly deepening. Chapter 3. The Misunderstanding. The local cultural festival was in full swing when David and Lyria arrived. The streets were lined with colorful stalls displaying an array of earthly and alien goods, and the air was filled with a mingling sense of different world cuisines. David was eager to show Lyria the diversity of Earth's traditions. This festival is a perfect place to experience the cultural mosaic of our planet, he said, guiding her through the crowded lanes. Lyria was captivated by the vibrant displays and lively music. As they approached a stall selling traditional Indian textiles, David explained the significance of the patterns and the art of weaving. Lyria listened intently, her eyes reflecting a genuine interest. Suddenly, a loud voice cut through the chatter of the crowd. "What is this creature doing here?" An elderly man was pointing accusingly at Lyria, his face contorted with suspicion. "We don't need these aliens here." The festive atmosphere soured instantly. People turned to stare, and an uncomfortable silence fell over the nearby area. David felt a surge of protectiveness. He stepped in front of Lyria, facing the man. "Sir, this is a cultural festival, open to all, including our guests from other planets," David said firmly, trying to keep the situation calm. "Lyria is here to learn about our culture, just as we hope to learn about hers." The man scoffed, unmoved. They bring nothing but trouble. Why do we entertain them? Lyria, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. Her voice was calm, but carried a strength that drew the attention of the onlookers. "I understand your fear," she began, her empathic abilities allowing her to sense the man's emotions. "Change is often frightening, but it also brings growth and new understanding." Her words seemed to take the man by surprise. His anger faltered, replaced by confusion. "I don't need to understand anything about you," he muttered, but his voice was less certain. David saw an opportunity to mediate further. "Understanding each other is exactly why we have these festivals," he explained. "It's about sharing and finding common ground. Maybe you could tell us about your culture, and Lyria could share hers." The crowd, which had been watching the exchange, seemed to support David's approach. A younger woman from the crowd stepped forward. "I'd like to hear from both of you," she said, looking curiously at Lyria. Encouraged by this support, Lyria spoke about her planet, describing her people's deep connection to nature and their artistic expressions. As she spoke, the initial hostility in the crowd dissipated, replaced by intrigue and murmurs of appreciation. The elderly man listened, his brows furrowed. After Lyria finished, he didn't speak immediately. Then, almost reluctantly, he spoke of his own heritage, a fishing village where community and tradition bound the people together. Lyria nodded respectfully. "Our love for our communities is something we share, it seems." David watched the transformation in the man's demeanor. "Perhaps next year, your village could have a stall here at the festival," he suggested. The man considered this, then nodded slowly. "Maybe we will," he conceded, and then turned and walked away, leaving a thoughtful silence in his wake. As the tension eased, David and Lyria continued their tour of the festival, their earlier enjoyment restored. "Thank you for handling that so well," David said to Lyria as they moved on. "It was a challenging moment, but it reminded me of the power of dialogue," Lyria responded. "It's not just about speaking, it's about listening and feeling." David smiled, impressed by her wisdom. "That's a lesson worth sharing," he agreed. The festival, despite the hiccup, had proven to be a fruitful ground for cultural exchange and understanding, just as he had hoped. Chapter 4. The Bond Deepens. David's apartment was modest but comfortable, filled with artifacts and photographs from his travels around Earth and beyond. As Lyria stepped inside, her eyes immediately caught sight of a framed picture from Mars, showing a human and alien shaking hands against a backdrop of the red landscape. "This is quite a collection," Lyria remarked, moving closer to examine the photographs. David joined her, explaining the stories behind each image. "Each of these represents a milestone in our interstellar relations. I like to keep them around as reminders of the progress we've made, and the work still ahead." Lyria's attention lingered on a sculpture that depicted intertwined human and alien hands. "This is beautiful. Did you make this?" "I did," David admitted, a touch of pride in his voice. "Sculpting is a hobby of mine. It helps me think and unwind." Lyria smiled, her gaze warm. "Art is a window to the soul. It says much about the artist." Encouraged by her interest, David suggested, "Why don't we try creating something together? I have some clay and other materials." "That sounds delightful," Lyria agreed. They set up a small workspace at the kitchen table with clay and tools. David demonstrated a basic sculpting technique, and they both began working on individual pieces. As they molded the clay, they continued their conversation from earlier in the day. "So, Lyria, tell me about your first impression of Earth," David asked, his hands busy shaping the soft clay. Lyria thought for a moment, her hands skillfully curving the clay into a smooth form. "It's very vibrant," she began, "so full of life and color, yet chaotic in ways that are both fascinating and overwhelming." Your cities buzz with energy, and yet there's a complexity to your societies that I'm eager to understand better. David nodded, understanding the sentiment. It can be a lot to take in. I hope our efforts can help bridge that complexity. As they sculpted, Lyria's piece began to take shape, a depiction of two figures, one clearly human and the other subtly alien, each reaching out to the other. "What are you making?" David inquired, genuinely curious. "It's inspired by our discussions today," Lyria explained. "A representation of first contact, of reaching out, not just physically but emotionally and culturally." David was touched. "It's beautiful, Lyria. You have a real talent for this." Lyria laughed lightly. "I'm glad you think so. What about you? What are you making?" David's sculpture was less defined, abstract forms that hinted at interconnectedness. "I suppose it's about connection too. How everything we do, every interaction, builds on the last, creating something bigger than ourselves." As they finished their sculptures, David set them aside to dry. "I think we've both created something quite meaningful today," he observed. Lyria agreed, her eyes reflecting the soft evening light that filtered through the window. "This has been a wonderful evening, David. Thank you for sharing this space and your art with me." "It was my pleasure," David said, feeling a sense of accomplishment and closeness that went beyond their diplomatic mission. "I believe that tonight we've not only created art, but also deepened a friendship." Lyria nodded, her expression serene yet thoughtful. "Yes, I feel that too. It's these moments that truly build understanding and respect." They cleaned up together, and Lyria prepared to leave. At the door, David hesitated, then said, "I hope we can have more evenings like this." "I would like that very much," Lyria responded, stepping out into the cool night. As David watched her leave, he felt a sense of anticipation for the future of their growing friendship and the potential it held for both their worlds. Chapter 5. The Kiss. David and Lyria found themselves on the rooftop of his building later that week, a spot he often visited to clear his mind and gaze at the stars. Tonight, the city's lights twinkled below them, a muted backdrop against the vast, starry sky. "This is one of my favorite places," David shared as they leaned against the railing. "It's peaceful, away from the city's constant noise. It's a place where I can think." Lyria looked up at the sky, then back at David. "I can see why you like it. There's a certain calm here that's hard to find in the bustling streets below." They fell into a comfortable silence, each lost in thought. David was the first to break it. "Lyria, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course," she replied, turning to face him fully. "How do you deal with loneliness?" David asked. "Being so far from your home and your people?" Lyria considered the question. "It's not always easy," she admitted, "but I find connection in different ways. Through my mission, the people I meet, the experiences I share." And she paused, a slight smile playing on her lips, "through new friendships." David felt a warmth spread through him. "I'm glad," he said softly. "I hope that our friendship helps." "It does," Lyria assured him. "More than you know." They shared another silence, this one laden with unspoken words and emotions. It was Lyria who spoke next. "David, I've been thinking about our discussions on empathy and connection. I feel something unique with you, an understanding that goes beyond words." David met her gaze, his heart beating faster. "I feel it too," he confessed. "It's like nothing I've ever experienced." Encouraged by his response, Lyria took a step closer. "In my culture, when two beings feel a profound connection, they share a kiss. Not just a physical one, but one that bridges hearts and minds." David's breath hitched. "Is that something you'd want to share with me?" "Yes, Lyria whispered, "if you're willing." Without another word, David closed the distance between them. As their lips met, it wasn't just a physical sensation but an emotional one that enveloped him. He felt a rush of emotions from Lyria: curiosity, affection, a deep loneliness, and a burgeoning hope. The kiss was soft, explorative, communicating things for which they had no words. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I've never felt anything like that," David said, his voice a low murmur. Lyria touched his cheek lightly. "Nor have I. It's a gift from my people, but sharing it with you felt right." David smiled, reaching for her hand. "Thank you for trusting me with such a gift." They spent a few more minutes on the rooftop, talking quietly about what the kiss had meant for each of them. It was a moment of vulnerability and strength, of two vastly different individuals finding common ground in an unexpected way. As the night deepened, they agreed it was time to head back. Descending from the rooftop, David felt a shift in their relationship. They had crossed a threshold, not just of friendship but of something deeper, marked indelibly by the alien kiss that bridged a human's heart. Chapter 6. The Conflict. David and Lyria's deepening relationship did not go unnoticed, and while many at the trade port celebrated their growing bond as a symbol of successful intercultural exchange, others viewed it with suspicion and resentment. One brisk morning, as David escorted Lyria to a scheduled workshop aimed at fostering human-alien partnerships, they were confronted by a small group of protesters outside the conference center. The group was a mix of humans and aliens, united in their distrust of interspecies relationships. A human man stepped forward, his expression stern. "David Mallory," he addressed loudly, drawing attention from passers-by. "Is it wise to blur the lines between professional duties and personal affairs? What message does this send about our species?" David stopped, facing the man squarely. "Our mission here is to promote understanding and cooperation," he responded calmly. "My relationship with Lyria does not conflict with our goals. It exemplifies them." An alien from the group, her scales shimmering with agitation, chimed in. "And yet, many of us feel uncomfortable. Where do we draw the line between personal experimentation and cultural integrity?" Lyria, who had been quietly observing the exchange, now spoke. "I understand your concerns," she began, her tone conciliatory. "But consider that boundaries often shift as we grow and learn from one another. Our relationship does not threaten our cultures, but enriches them." The protesters seemed taken aback by her direct engagement, but the human man was persistent. "We need assurances that our values will not be compromised." David felt a surge of frustration, but maintained his composure. "Our values include respect, diversity, and openness. These are not being compromised. They are being upheld." The discussion was heating up when another figure approached, an older human man known for his influential role in interstellar diplomatic circles. "May I have a word?" he interjected, looking between David, Lyria, and the protesters. Recognizing him, the crowd quieted, allowing him to speak. "I've been observing your conversation," he began, addressing everyone. "It's clear there is fear and uncertainty. However, challenging our preconceptions is a part of growth. We must ask ourselves, are we truly promoting understanding, or are we clinging to outdated fears?" His words resonated, and the mood among the protesters began to shift, turning from confrontation to contemplation. "Let's continue this discussion inside," the elder suggested, gesturing towards the conference center. "We are here to learn from each other, after all." Reluctantly, the protesters agreed, and the group moved into the building. David and Lyria led a session where they openly discussed their relationship, addressing concerns about cultural dilution and the importance of personal connections in diplomatic relations. As the workshop progressed, the atmosphere softened. Participants began to share their own experiences and fears about intercultural interactions. By the session's end, there was a general sense of cautious optimism. Walking back to their offices, David looked at Lyria and smiled. "Thank you for handling that so well. You have an incredible way with words." Lyria returned his smile. "We make a good team, don't we?" "We do," David agreed, feeling reassured. Despite the hurdles, he was confident that their example could help pave the way for a future where fear was replaced with understanding and suspicion with trust. Chapter 7. The Resolution. David and Lyria's growing relationship had sparked debates within the trade port, and these discussions had culminated in an invitation for David to speak at a major intercultural conference. The event was set to host delegates from numerous planets, providing a perfect stage to advocate for deeper understanding and integration. As the day of the conference arrived, David prepared his notes, feeling the weight of the task ahead. He was to talk about human-alien relationships, using his and Lyria's experiences as a case study. "Are you nervous?" Lyria asked, noticing David's contemplative mood as they walked towards the conference hall. "A bit," David admitted. "It's one thing to live through these experiences. It's another to present them as examples for others to follow." Lyria gave him an encouraging look. "Just speak from the heart. Show them what I've seen in you." David smiled, buoyed by her support. They entered the hall, which was filled with a diverse audience. Taking his place at the podium, David scanned the crowd, taking in the expectant faces. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice echoing in the packed room. "Today, I want to talk about fear and possibility. The fear of losing one's cultural identity and the possibilities that open up when we truly connect with someone different." He proceeded to describe his initial encounters with Lyria, emphasizing how their relationship had evolved. What began as a diplomatic assignment turned into a profound connection. "Through Lyria, I've not only learned about her culture, but have gained insights into my own." David then addressed the concerns about cultural purity and integrity. "Culture is not diminished through sharing, it's enriched. Our connection hasn't erased our identities, it has strengthened them." As David spoke, Lyria watched from the side, her presence a silent testament to the truth of his words. The audience listened intently, and during the question-and-answer session, a delegate raised a hand. "Mr. Mallory, isn't there a risk that such relationships could lead to assimilation rather than integration?" David nodded, acknowledging the concern. "It's a valid fear. But assimilation implies one culture consuming another. Integration, on the other hand, involves creating space for all identities. It's a balance, and it's delicate, but it is possible with respect and openness." Another delegate, an alien with a thoughtful expression, added, "In my world, we've seen similar fears. But we've also seen that isolating ourselves leads to stagnation. We grow by learning from others." The discussion broadened, with more participants sharing their views. It was clear that the topic resonated deeply, touching on universal fears and hopes. As the session closed, the older diplomat who had supported them at the workshop stood up. "Thank you, David, for your candor. And thank you, Lyria, for sharing your journey with us. It's discussions like these that pave the way for a more inclusive future." The applause that followed was heartfelt, and many delegates approached David and Lyria afterward, eager to talk more about the issues raised. Walking out of the conference hall, David felt a sense of accomplishment. "That went better than I expected," he said to Lyria. "It did," Lyria agreed. "You opened minds today, David, and maybe even some hearts." As they left the conference behind, they knew the dialogue they'd started wouldn't end here. It was just another step in the ongoing journey of intercultural understanding, one they were both committed to advancing. Chapter 8. The Future Together. In the weeks following the conference, David and Lyria found themselves at the center of a cultural shift. Their story had inspired others to open dialogues about integration and the benefits of intercultural understanding. Feeling motivated by the positive response, they decided to take a significant step forward. David invited Lyria to his apartment one evening, a place that had become a symbol of their shared journeys and discoveries. The room was softly lit, creating a warm, inviting atmosphere. "Lyria, these past weeks have been incredible," David started, his tone reflective. "I've been thinking about our future, about what comes next for us." Lyria, sensing the seriousness in his voice, nodded. "I have been thinking the same. We've started something important, not just for us, but for everyone watching and learning from our example." David took a deep breath. "I want to propose something, a new project, one that could serve as a living example of our beliefs. A cultural exchange center, here in the port, where humans and aliens can learn from each other, share experiences, and grow together." Lyria's eyes lit up at the idea. "A center for exchange? That sounds wonderful. It could be a place where fear turns into understanding, where differences are celebrated." "Exactly," David agreed. "And I can't think of anyone better to partner with on this than you. Would you consider co-leading this project with me?" Lyria reached out, taking his hands in hers. "I would love to. It's a chance to make a real difference, to expand on what we've started." They spent the evening planning, discussing potential programs for the center, outreach strategies, and how they could involve both their communities. The project felt like a natural extension of their work and their relationship, blending their professional and personal passions into one ambitious endeavor. As the night progressed, David looked around the apartment, at the sculptures they had created together, the pictures of their journey. "Lyria, there's something else I want to ask you," he said, his voice slightly nervous. Lyria looked at him, her expression attentive. "I've been thinking about home lately," David continued. "Not just where I come from, but where I feel at home. And I realize that it's with you. Would you consider moving in here? With me?" The question hung in the air, charged with possibilities. Lyria's face softened into a smile. "David, I'd be honored to make this our home together." They embraced, the decision sealing a new chapter for them both personally and professionally. Over the next few months, David and Lyria worked tirelessly to establish the Cultural Exchange Center. They faced challenges, from logistical hurdles to funding issues, but the response from the community was overwhelmingly positive. The day of the center's opening arrived, and they stood together at the entrance, ready to welcome the first visitors. The building was a vibrant mix of earthly and alien design, a visual testament to the blend of cultures. "Look at what we've accomplished," Lyria said, her voice filled with emotion as people began to flow in. "It's just the beginning," David replied, squeezing her hand. "Here's to a future of learning, sharing, and growing together." As they walked into the center, hand in hand, they knew they were stepping into a new era. An era where barriers were broken down and connections were forged, all starting with the alien kiss that bridged a human's heart.